How are people so mad about Trump's gold card when this has basically existed already for decades? Hello, hello, my name is Merc, and as a disclaimer, I am absolutely not any sort of expert on the subject, so take my words with a pinch of salt. I'm just an everyman giving their opinion, which is that it's too easy to come to the United States of America as a permanent resident. Now, that's great for singular people or small families who truly want to be here and make an effort to do so, but others abuse the system by becoming citizens in order to bring over the last 500 years of their blood relatives through a seemingly unmitigated daisy chain. A problem that wouldn't be a problem if the USA was undesirable to live in, because no one would want to come here. And despite everything you hear on the internet, the USA really is a very desirable place to live, which is why everyone wants to come here. Speaking of everything you hear on the internet, it's pretty much all about deportation, but not many people talk about how easy it is to get in, unless they're making fun of Trump's wall, of course. After looking it up for myself, it seems a bit too simple. So let's start with the dumbest part, which technically is an aside from the normal methods of immigration. Now, if there's one thing that everyone should agree on, it's got to be this: the diversity visa. Up to 55,000 immigrants listed on this .gov. Up to 50,000 listed on this one. I don't know which is correct. But 50 to 55,000 immigrants every year come into the USA as lawful permanent residents. They don't have sponsorships. No family sponsorships, no employer sponsorships. They just sign their names into a free raffle, a lottery, and they are chosen at random, and if they're lucky, and then they get to come and live in the USA forever. Like, that's insane. That's completely insane, but there's got to be some stipulations to that, right? I mean, it's got to make some sort of sense. Well, according to AI, the applicants must meet strict education or work experience criteria. But according to the file on the .gov site, the official rules say that you have to have at least a high school education or its equivalent, defined as successful completion of a 12-year course of formal elementary and secondary education, or 2 years of work experience within the past 5 years in an occupation that requires at least 2 years of training or experience to perform. Honestly, the biggest hurdle, the highest hurdle for immigrants coming into the USA seems to be the spacing of the text on this form. I mean, look at that. All formal elementary. It's difficult for me to read, and I'm a native English speaker. Now, there is another stipulation. Countries that have had 50,000 or more natives immigrate to the USA within the past 5 years are not eligible for this visa. So Canada, for instance, 50,000 people went from Canada to the USA over the past 5 years. Canada's axed. A lot of these people probably came through the diversity program as well, like, I don't know, Nigeria or the Philippines, or well, maybe not the Philippines. I don't know. The point is that these countries here are not allowed, but every other country is. Well, aside from, I guess, the ones that Trump's put on the blacklist, but that's kind of a new thing. So here's something that's bizarre to me. I didn't know about this until I was reading. Like, I would have said the diversity visa is insane anyway, but I read this and completely lost my mind. And bear with me because, like I said, the spacing on this text is rough. So, requirement number 1: natives of countries with historically low rates of immigration to the United States may be eligible to enter. If you're not a native of a country with historically low rates of immigration to the United States, there are 2 other ways you might be able to qualify. Is your spouse a native of a country with historically low rates of immigration to the United States? If yes, you can claim your spouse's country of birth, provided that you and your spouse are named on selected entry, are found eligible and issued diversity visas and enter the United States at the same time. What? And then the second one's even weirder. Are you a native of a country that does not have historically low rates of immigration to the United States, and neither of your parents were born in or legally resident in your native country at the time of your birth? If both of those statements are true, you may be able to claim the country of birth of one of your parents if it is a country whose natives are eligible for the DV 2026 program. So if I'm reading that correctly, it means that you are not eligible in the country that you're from but you can claim the birth country that your parents are from if it's a different country that is eligible. Then what's even the point? Like, if you're from a place that's not eligible and your parents are from a place that is eligible, you can then claim your parents' birth country? Then there is no restrictions. Am I not understanding this correctly? It's so weirdly worded and such a bizarre concept to begin with that I'm not entirely sure I'm even understanding it correctly. And all of this to increase the diversity of the USA because we're not already drowning in it, right? I mean, this is the entire purpose of this visa. 55,000 people come into the country every year just for the sake of making the country more diverse. And they all have to come from countries that had less than 50,000 people in the past 5 years, so it's not going to be like Canada or the UK or anything like that because they're pretty much always going to have a lot of immigrants. So it's mostly going to be third world countries, right? Is this what we need? Now I'm going to be loosely covering the generalities of the most common ways to gain access to the USA. I have no real comprehension behind why visa is involved, aside from a likely effort to spread it as a monopoly, but all the same, getting an immigration visa is usually sponsored for an immigrant by their family or an employer, and upon getting a visa number and entering the country, they are issued a green card and classified as a lawful permanent resident, or LPR. There's a lot of avenues to filing for a green card beyond the previously mentioned, some of which are bound to be exceptionally rare and reasonable exceptions, like, for instance, being trafficked. The point of this video is about how it's too easy to naturalize to the USA that you don't even need to cheat the system. It's not to say that all immigrants should be denied. So I'm focusing on the biggest bridges here, and that, to me, is the fact that there's an ever-expanding amount of people who can sponsor immigrants and an ever-growing number of vote seekers and bleeding hearts who will defend any and all immigration as morally good. So, on the topic of visa and green cards, there's a method called consular processing, which doesn't even require you to go to the USA. You have your job or family or whoever sponsor you. Eventually, if everything goes well, you get your immigrant visa number, and then you go to the USA. Now, this visa lasts for like 6 months, and then you go to the USA, and once you go to the USA, they give you a green card, and that acts as your lawful permanent resident card. You do have to refresh it every 10 years, but you can naturalize twice over in that time frame, even without marrying or doing any military service. So you don't even have to enter the USA to get this visa. And then once you have that visa, all you have to do is just visit the USA and you'll get your green card. All right, so covering the green card eligibility categories. This is going to be a little bit tedious, but first of all, the VAWA is the Violence Against Women Act. It sounds sexist. It's probably written in a previous era where they thought all men caused violence and all violence was caused by men, which is totally different to how the world is now, right? They definitely don't say those things now. But anyway, it's just the name. In terms of the actual terminology that they use, it seems to be any gender can do anything, but they have yet to change the name for some reason. Widower makes sense as well. I don't agree with fiance because I don't know, I'm a pessimist. So like the first thing I think when you say something like that is like someone just gets a fiance and then they get a green card and then they break up and it's like, "Oh, well, we were in love, but now we're not. Now to move on to my 3,721st Ukrainian fiance." Oh, what a weird thing that they're putting all of their money in my bank account when I agree to get them into the country. That's so strange, isn't it? Anyway, I'm just a pessimist. I don't agree with bringing over fiancés as legal permanent residents. Spouse, okay, it's a little bit more effort for that, but anyway, I'm going to ignore this top one here because it's basically covered in the second section. The second section is about LPRs and citizens and whom they can bring into the country. So LPRs can bring in their spouses, their unmarried children of under the age of 21, and their unmarried children, which it lists as son and daughter instead of child. I don't know if that's just like a linguistic difference or what, who are 21 years or older. So basically, they're children as long as they're unmarried. That's it. And civilians, they can bring over married sons and daughters. I think they can bring over parents too. I'm pretty sure of that, but it's not listed here, so maybe I'm wrong. But I could have sworn I was right. Anyway, the big problem here is brothers and sisters. Citizens can bring over brothers and sisters, and that's where I think the big snowball thing happens, because you've got two parents, but you could have 20 siblings, and each of those siblings could have 10 children, and not to mention their spouses and parents as well. And this is the infinite immigrant glitch right here. That's the way I look at it. Not to say that every immigrant does that, but I think it does happen, and it's the more people you have, the more it's going to happen. So it's just going to keep ramping up. On the green card for family preference immigrants, there's something rather interesting here, which is it says under the eligibility for adjustment of status, you are admissible to the United States for lawful permanent residence or eligible for a waiver of inadmissibility or other form of relief. Now, waiver of inadmissibility. Now, am I correct in thinking this means that you can be denied? I mean, I can read it from here. It's Form I-601. Application for waiver of grounds of inadmissibility. If you are inadmissible to the United States and are seeking an immigrant visa, blah, 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 you must file this form to seek a waiver of certain grounds of inadmissibility. So if you're disallowed from coming over to America, you can get a magical form that it allows you to come over anyway? Am I reading this correctly? I don't understand. I looked down at this list of things that they have for the checklist of required initial evidence for informational purposes only. And some of these things are absolutely insane to me. Evidence to support your request for a vaccination exemption. I don't think the left wing would be in favor of that. You can get a waiver that allows you to come into the country even if you were barred from coming in because you didn't have vaccinations. And right above that, evidence to support a waiver for admissibility due to a communicable disease of public health significance. What? So we know that they have a severe public health problem with some sort of communicable disease, and then they can sign a form, and we say, oh, I see you've got your magical I-601 form there. All right, patient zero, come on over. What the hell? Another one that's bizarre is evidence to support a waiver of inadmissibility due to physical or mental disorder and associated harmful behavior. What are we talking about here? Am I completely wrong about all of this? Are you telling me that we know that someone has some sort of disorder that can cause harm to people around them, whether it's a health problem or a mental problem, and they can just sign a form and come over anyway? Am I reading that correctly? Am I understanding that correctly? So after family, the other most common is, of course, employers giving you sponsorships. So here we have immigrant workers. There's 3 preferences for this, each giving you different wait times to enter the country. First 2 are basically like geniuses, artists, savants, that kind of thing. The third one is various workers from unskilled to having a bachelor's. So the thing to look at here for employment visas is the third preference stuff. Obviously, like first and second preference, you're talking about geniuses and people in like high-end positions. If you're talking dangerous vectors, potential illicit immigrants, then third preference, people who can be unskilled labor is where you're looking. Now, I've looked at all this on AI mostly because it's much easier to read on AI, but I do cross-reference everything. Here's the employment third preference for the official website, the .gov website. So if you want to read through that, but the main thing is the perm. You have to get past the perm, which basically just means proving that you couldn't find someone, and even that's like questionable. I think it actually specifically says in AI that you couldn't. Requires proving no qualified U.S. workers are available, whatever that means, like available. I mean, what does that mean, really? Like, what if you, like, okay, hypothetically, what if you wanted to make, this is just an example, I'm coming up with this right now. What if you wanted to make a Somalian daycare, right? How many people in the USA speak Somalian? Okay, so you have to get some people to speak Somalian in your Somalian daycare, right? Well, you reach out to some Somalians from Somalia, and then you bring them over on immigrant visas. And you could do that. I mean, that's just a completely made-up scenario that I've just created, but you could do that for anything. Like, you can come up with any kind of like crazy startup, like I wanna have a parachute business, and I wanna have it run by Mongolians, and so we need some people to speak Mongolian. Like, you can come up with anything. So there's that, and then you have to convince the government about it, and I don't think that'd be very difficult because most people, even officials, they just want to get it done and get it over with. They're lazy, apathetic, cutting corners, and maybe you haven't really broken any rules, and the rules are just made poorly, so you get away with it all the same. Define realistic job requirements to avoid tailoring the role specifically to the foreign worker. But who's to say my Mongolian parachuting business is some sort of illicit thing? Like what if that's my dream? My dream is to open a Mongolian parachuting business in the USA. Who can really say otherwise, you know? And that's where the sympathetic leveraging of BS can break rules like this, because they're written expecting people to treat the rules correctly, and people won't do that because people are rats who will break the rules in order to get what they want. It is what it is, I suppose. The physician national interest waiver below that, I think, is quite funny. This is, I don't know, it's like reverse bribery or something. You can come to the country and work full-time in a clinical practice in a designated underserved area for a set period of time, and that will get you a green card. So you you have to like agree to do that, and you get a green card, which, I mean, I guess that sort of makes sense. Like if you need doctors, then just bribe them with green cards. But below that, speaking of bribery and green cards, immigrant investors have invested in or actively investing 1,050,000 or 800,000 in targeted employment areas that will create a full-time position for at least 10 qualifying employees. That's right. The EB-5 visa. The EB-5 visa has existed since 1990's Immigration Act, and it allows you to buy your way into the country for only $500,000 before Biden signed a thing in 2022, and yet people have lost their minds over Donald Trump's gold card or whatever it is. Like, Biden signed this that bumped it up to 1 million, but and not even 1 million, because most people do the T thing for only 800,000, so it's not even 1 million really. And if you look at this, in 2022, I think, yeah, China, India, and Vietnam comprise more than 3/4 of EB-5 admissions, with China alone representing 56.3% of all admissions. That's crazy. Absolutely crazy. I mean, you could just buy your way into the country with this. It's wild. Okay, so we're going through the most common ways to get into the country with the green card, as far as I believe anyway. We went through family, went through employment. Now, obviously, we're going to do the Liberian refugee immigration fairness category. Obviously not. Asylee and refugee, which is basically the same thing. And no one says asylee because it sounds stupid, so they say asylum seeker instead. But these are basically the exact same thing. It just means someone whose political ideology or religious beliefs or even their gender identity or whatever can cause them to fear for their life. And most importantly, the USA has to want them. The USA has to want, it's basically virtue signaling, I think. The USA has to declare, what's it called, presidential determination. It has to declare a country of humanitarian interest, or like a continent or whatever, wherever they declare special. And then those people can be refugees. So here, there's a chart, if you want to look at it, from 1980 to 2025. In 2026, which it currently is not, but will be in a few hours, you'll probably hear some explosions in the background, we have Afrikaners being set as the only population specifically mentioned as the primary group included in the 7,500 refugee ceiling for 2026. And the PD does not mention other victims of illegal or unjust discrimination in their respective homelands. The Democrats did not like this because apparently they were never consulted with in Congress. I don't really care because, I mean, refugees and asylees is something that I get it and I agree with it to a certain extent, but America has to decide at a certain point what they want to do. Like, are we going to be Team America World Police, or are we going to be everyone's homeless shelter? Like, we can't do both, really, and we can't do either one half-assed. We have to whole-ass something. So we either deny people entry, or we just bomb the living crap out of whoever's harassing them, and they stop doing it. And I'm sure the people who, well, I mean, maybe not, maybe they would rather come to America, but the refugees would probably rather stay in their home, right? Like, most people don't want to leave their home, even if it is to go to a first world country. But I think the USA should decide what it wants to do, and I don't care if people think that makes me sound like a white supremacist. I mean, we can still help them with bombs. They just bomb their enemies. Problem solved. But we can't do both, and we can't do either one halfway successfully. But it's just going to fail on both fronts. So yeah, I don't really like the concept of refugees and asylees insofar as the way it's currently working. It's not a good look. Lastly, and I think most importantly, is the topic of naturalization. The problem is that it's so simple that anyone can do it, which is what results in approximately 800,000 to 1 million immigrants successfully naturalizing to the USA per year. Note that smaller countries, often called idyllic by many, such as Denmark with a population of 6 million or Sweden with a population of 11 million, would be totally crippled by something like this within the span of a year, but the USA is supposed to grin and bear it. It's a bigger country, sure, but there's a limit to what's possible, and a limit to what's reasonable. Now, before we get to the test, one last thing to mention is that you can apply for citizenship after being an LPR for 5 years, or 3 years if married to a citizen. There are many caveats to things as complicated as immigration, like military service reducing that time frame further, but as people willing to join the military are less likely to cause any problems, I'm just going to ignore them. So, the gap between living on the other side of the planet and recruiting all 15 of your siblings and their 60 children and parents to move to the USA could be as small as 3 years, plus the time it takes to pass a naturalization test. That's, of course, a hyperbolic example, as in 2024's fiscal year, the average green card holder's length prior to naturalization was 7.5 years, but even if it's only some people gaming the system, it will continue to push that snowball, and that snowball will continue to grow. Now, we're at the meat and potatoes, but just one quick thing. There's exemptions to cover. These are absolutely crazy. If you're 50 years or older, and you've been in the States as an LPR for 20 years at the time of filing, or if you're 55 years of older and you've been in the States for 15 years, you are exempt from taking the test, the naturalization test, in English. Yeah, that's right. If you have actively avoided learning English for decades, then you can take the test in your native language instead of the native language of the country. You don't have to learn English for some inexplicable reason. They're rewarding them with something that should be maybe not punished exactly, but they've lived in the country for decades without knowing English, so now they don't have to? Am I taking crazy pills? And the other one's possibly even worse. People who are 65 or older and have been an LPR for at least 20 years have a simpler test. And the reason they have a simpler test is because the government has basically just admitted that people who are 65 or older are starting to go crazy with dementia or something. Like, what? So if you're saying that they need a simpler test because they've gone batshit crazy, does that stop them from ramming a Ford F-250 into the side of some minivan with a bunch of kids in it? Does it stop them from pulling out a gun and opening fire? You're saying that they're a crazy old person, and you're giving them an easier test so that they can naturalize into the country. What is that? How does that make sense? Oh, well, I see you're blind. Don't worry, I'm going to make your driver's test easy for you. What the hell? I don't get it. And the medical disability, of course, makes sense. I mean, you have to change that up for people who are blind or deaf or whatever. But anyway, moving on. Now, we've got the English portion of the test, which is speaking, reading, and writing. The speaking isn't actually a test in and of itself. I mean, it sort of is, but they just add that into the rest of it. You know, it's just how you generally act. So you're allowed to make mistakes, flub words, have a thick accent, etc. That's fine. But you have to be able to understand what they're saying. So the reading test. Now, this is all here for you to read on the screen if you want to. I'm not going to read it all because it's a lot, and it would take like 20 minutes to read it all, and there's no point because a lot of it's repetitive. The reading test, they'll give you 3 sentences, and you have to read one of those sentences correctly. That's it. You just have to read one of the sentences correctly, and so it's correctly to the point where the officer can understand you. Not perfectly correctly, but correct enough. The writing test, Want to take a stab at it? Yeah, that's right. You're given 3 sentences, and you have to be able to write at least one of those 3 sentences. And again, you're allowed to make some errors. It says here grammatical, spelling, capitalization errors, but that's it. You just have to write one of 3 sentences. Then we have the civics test. Oh boy, the civics test. See, here's the thing about the civics test. It's not really a test. There's it's a bank of 128 questions for the new 2025 version. 128 questions, right? And you have to they give you 20 questions, unless you're doing the old crazy person version. They'll give you 20 questions and you have to answer 12 of them correctly, right? But the thing is, they give you all of the questions and all of the answers. As you can see right here, these are some of the questions and answers on the civics test. And you know what? I said before that Redditor who claimed that immigrants were smarter than Americans because immigrants could solve the naturalization test and get in, but the citizens couldn't. They were too stupid to do it. That's not what it is. These questions are esoteric. You don't need to know most of this crap. It's like it's exactly like, are you smarter than a 5th grader? Yeah, well, I don't know the exact Kelvin temperature of the surface of the sun, and in a month, that 5th grader won't know it either because it's irrelevant. They only know it because they were forced to learn it in school, and then they're going to forget it immediately afterwards. Do you know these? Do you know how many amendments does the U.S. Constitution have? Look, it's got the star next to it. This is one of those things that old crazy people need to know. How were changes made to the U.S. Constitution? Name 2 important ideas from the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. Why do U.S. representatives serve shorter terms than U.S. senators? Now, that's really important for immigrants to know, isn't it? Who elects members of the House of Representatives? Yeah, I'm sure some person coming over from Egypt really needs to know that to be a good American, right? Who signs bills to become laws? What are 2 cabinet-level positions? How many seats are in the Supreme Court? Why would some person from Mongolia need to know that? Why? What do we show loyalty to when we say the Pledge of Allegiance? Like, come on. Is that even a question? That makes someone a good American, knowing that? I mean, they have to do it just to become a citizen. What is one way Americans can serve their country? Okay, my point is that this does not make you a good American. Knowing how to answer some of these questions, or maybe even all of them. The colonists came to America for many reasons, name one. This does not mean that you are capable of living in the country. This does not mean that you are capable of being a good citizen. This does not mean that you are capable of fitting in. What group of people was taken and sold as slaves? Oh, good God. All of them. All of them. This doesn't make you a good American. These questions, they don't mean anything. And this is the entire reason I made this video. Because of that damn Redditor. Name one leader of the women's rights movements in the 1800s. Why would some Swedish person coming over to the USA need to know that? How does that make them a better American? And that's my point. And I guess my point as well is, like, if I fail a portion of the naturalization test, will I be retested? Yes, you'll be retested. You'll be retested for only the thing that you failed, though. Only the thing that you failed. And how many times can I apply for naturalization? There is no limit to the number of times you can apply for naturalization, but you must pay the filing fee for each form you submit. So this is sort of where I'm coming from. It's like I said, it's an infinite immigration machine, and the ones who do immigrate, they're being tested by reading one of 3 sentences, by writing one of 3 sentences, and by answering 12 of 20 questions, which are like, why did the United States enter the Vietnam War? Like, how? Moving on. The rest of this video is just me rambling about immigration. If you'd prefer to excuse yourself here, you're not really missing anything special. So, the USA has been, and still is, called a melting pot, but I believe this is inaccurate and is often used as an excuse by modern activists and politicians and such. Many countries are multi-ethnic. The USA differed in that it was by any practical definition lawless, and this was due to its size and the technological era of when it was founded. Whether exploitation, adventure, or escape, it brought people from many different other countries on top of the pre-existing natives, creating this alleged melting pot. But the scale of the USA made it impossible to police. It's also why guns and personal defense are such an intrinsic part of its history. Any unpoliced country would in time become a so-called melting pot, but rather than this fantasy of a melting pot where people come together and their cultures form one, the true outcome is more similar to wolf packs carving out territory for themselves and fighting over it. Humans and wolves are indistinguishable at a base level. They form groups out of necessity in order to coalesce power, migrate to where they want to be, take it over if possible, and defend it from others taking it. That includes digital places too. I'm of course talking about how demographics all live in their enclaves, their trailer parks, their ghettos, their favelas, little Chinas, ivory towers, gated communities, metropolises, rural villages, churches, mosques, hippie communes, Reddit, Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook, TikTok, or Instagram. Even inside a single country, people migrate to where they'll be accepted. Even fellow citizens are terrified of each other, and so they migrate and form enclaves, even if they don't realize they're doing it, but often they do. I've heard plenty of quotes from immigrants stating that they moved to specific areas explicitly to be around those who are like them. Places where they have the power. Places in America where they have the power. But again, even without immigrants, there are still enclaves forming, and they're usually detrimental to the country. The problem is that the USA lacks any real solidarity, creating this escapist mentality. It's like a tumor forming, and that tumor is rarely excised because the ones causing the problems are protected. They're defended by people saying, well, as long as they're not hurting anybody, but these vaporous arguments disappear with a breath just as quickly as virtue signaling dims after a tragedy. When you analyze the outcome of pretty much anything, you can define it as hurting people. Even the definition of hurting someone is extremely subjective. Like, to make matters more confounding, not every enclave is bad. Some of them are fine. Sometimes the bad thing is that society itself ostracizes people to the point that they feel that they need to hide, thus creating the enclave. In closing, I'd like you to honestly ask yourself a question, irrelevant of skin color, gender, sexuality, creed, or culture. Take a quick look at the USA's population, and you can see it fluctuates wildly in recent history. There's some margin for error here in regards to census. They're not perfect, and they've changed their available selections, and also some people classify white by literal skin color as opposed to nationality, but even considering that possibility, it's still an extreme shift. Any state on the southern border or any port states will display this shift well, but let's look at California, as it's the de facto capital of the left wing, and anti-deportation and all that is a very left-wing narrative these days. Now, in a mere 60 years, the amount of white people in California has dropped from approximately 92% to 41.2%, a decrease of 50.8% in less than an average human's lifespan. Again, this isn't about color. You don't even need to know the makeup of who's there or why it's changed. You could completely take white people out of the equation. What matters is that there's been a gargantuan and rapid shift in the demographics. I won't ask you anything about morality or ethics. I'm only going to ask you a question of possibility. Can a nation with such an erratic heartbeat survive? Can a country playing hot potato with its culture, religion, laws, and ideals in each of its four corners truly maintain societal peace? To me, this irregularity is a symptom of a problem. This arrhythmia has long been audible. The problem isn't just immigrants, nor are they exclusively the ones causing the problems. The USA has many problems, and we need to do damage control. Controlling immigration is just a small part of that. There are those who would stop the damage control, and they too are a problem. And yes, this has recently become a narrative of left-wing morality, but it doesn't matter who takes up the mantle. The why matters a little more, though. A good-hearted fool is preferable to a vote-hungry politician, and it wouldn't surprise me to learn that there are some guilty of selling out America in exchange for voting power. Alas, I somehow doubt any of this would change anyone's mind. They'd just scream white supremacist. But I hope people could at least agree to remove the DV lottery. I simply cannot comprehend how anyone can justify the 55,000 people brought in from so-called underrepresented countries on a yearly basis, and considering that a first world country has little reason to move to America, this realistically means third world countries, which in turn means they'll have extremely different ways of life, which in turn means they'll likely have extremist religious ideals and will struggle to assimilate into a country that may as well be another planet from theirs. Meanwhile, the USA is struggling with unemployment, wages that do not reflect the amount of stress their job builds, overpriced housing already limited by companies owning empty houses and will become even rarer because of immigrants, exorbitant medical prices, sanctified sexism, seesawing racism, fracturing and warring religions, ineffectual schooling, children brain rotted by social media and celebrities, and countless more things. How? How can anyone justify continuing to diversify a country that's been listing under the weight of diversity ever since some idiots decided to allow slavery, if not even before that? It's only a matter of time until we capsize, so how can you stand on a sinking ship, reaching out your hand to help others on board? Diversity is not something born entirely of immigrants. They're just another log on the funeral pyre. Neo-genders and identities, countless fetishes and religions, the sanctification of sexism and racism, and many other things too are also diversity, with some being positive, some being neutral, and some being negative. We are overwhelmingly diverse, critically so. At this rate, our endpoint is terminal, and revolutionizing immigration policies is only one step in a long process. Remember that the Californian statistics were across a mere 60 years. The only reason the USA hasn't ripped itself apart by now is due to the sheer size of it, which allows people to have their safe harbors that they can be happy in, but only until the population grows, one way or the other, and then, well, then it's wolf pack time. And time stops for neither the activist nor the authoritarian. Cast your eyes overseas to witness what happens to smaller countries when they have this problem, and ask yourself how the USA will end up any different to those European nations that are about to suffer a 1-2 combo of cultural and religious defeat in the game of civilization. Well, that's just what I believe. Maybe I'm a fool. There's no way that could happen to the USA, right? I mean, there's no history that proves invasive people subdued a country either through force or religious indoctrination, right? Right? Anyway, thanks for watching.
Take care now. Bye-bye then.